Hey guys, it's Mr. Riz. So we're going to go ahead and start the first lessons here. So we are doing activities 312. Now the reason why we start out with activities 312 is because we are using Project Lead the Way's Computer Science Essential course for the full year pathway. But at Lancaster High School, we have split this up into Computer Science Essentials, which focuses on the app making and robot part. And then the second half of that course, which is all about text-based programming, which we call Intro to Programming. So that's why we start with section 3, because this is actually like the third quarter material that we would learn in a full year of CSE from Project Lead the Way. And it's also 112 or 312 because this is the second section. The first section is just to get you familiar with the database that they want us to use, but we won't use it because Ripple is so much better than the completely ridiculously outpriced version of the Amazon workspace. So we are going to go ahead and jump into this. Now, what you guys will notice is that a lot of this material we've covered before, but we will take our time with it this time. We took our time with it before, so we learned the mistakes that we had, and we will fix those now as we move through. Today, we're doing day 1, which is part 1, part 2, and part 3. So let's jump right into it. And these are going to be 3 quizzes that we will take. So go ahead and take those quizzes. So I'll walk you guys through this. So up here, we have all the different goals here. We're going to make sure we can apply code fundamentally in text-based language, apply to file name conventions and versions control, and develop and test code incrementally, and develop a program independently. So we want to make sure we always ask this: can I describe an algorithm, what an algorithm does to some new coding? What are some mathematical logical concepts that are being used over and over again? And what computer science terms keep confusing me? So those are things we're going to watch out for. So what we're going to introduce some things that we've been using before, but we just never had a vocab word. So these are called tracer rounds. So tracer rounds are highly abstracted programs that implement only the most basic and necessary structures of proof or concept without implementing more specific peripheral details. So we can read through all this, but what are tracer rounds? They are used to help develop the process. They are used to help us understand what is going on. So if you think about an actual tracer round, which is like on a machine gun, is like every 4th or 5th round in the gun to cover it with sulfur. And as the bullet explodes through the gun, it lights off and you can see it lit. So as you're firing a machine gun, up into the night sky at some World War II planes, you will see the pathway that you're going on. So it'd be one thing, you didn't have to have those on there, but if they didn't, they would have no idea whether they're aiming in the right direction or not, or if they need to aim a little bit higher or a little bit lower. So we're using those tracer rounds to let us know, like, hey, are our variables the right way? Are we doing anything wrong in the meantime? So new coding language and some new concepts. So to begin learning the syntax, you will start out with experimenting with conditionals and functions. So ones that we have used before, which is print. I think you guys are fairly familiar with print. It displays the output. Type might be a new one. Type will tell us what kind of data we're using. And then ABS provides the absolute value of the mathematical. So a variable here can be a lot of different data types, and we've looked at some of them so far. The type will tell us what it is, whether it's a string or a float or integer or a Boolean, and we'll go through this. Now, you guys can skip this part with Cloud9. We will not use Cloud9. In fact, if you ever see Cloud9, associate that with Ripple here. We will always use Ripple because these Cloud9 terminals were really buggy last year, and the material on here is good enough that I want to keep, but the Cloud9 workspace just didn't work well, and they ended up changing a lot of it because Amazon was trying to make up their own workspace and charge a lot of money for it. So the one thing we can always do is use an interpreter to help us out. So I have some set up here. I've already pre-typed these in here. So if I say print type 1.8, and just like in math, we work inside the parentheses to out. So we got 1.8, we're gonna determine the type of it, and then we'll print that out. So we'll display what type 1.8 is. And same thing with King Henry VIII and false and 5. So if we run this, We get class float, class string, class bool, class integer, meaning 1.8 is a float, King Henry VIII is a string, false is a Boolean statement, and 5 is an integer. So let's see if we can match these here. And if you want, you can always go through and type these in. We can just add these here. So if you were confused on what the first one is, type 10. I'm going to go in here and say print type 10. And that would be a string. It's a string because it's a word and it's in quotations. All right, type 10. That would be an integer. And we can double check that up here. It's an integer. All right, what about negative 10? Are negative numbers still integers? I don't know. I'm a math teacher. I should know that. Yes, I know. It's an integer. All right, 10.0. Hopefully we remember anything that has a decimal. Well, that doesn't have a decimal value. It's not 10.8 or 10.0. It's just 10.0. We'll double check this here though. That is still a float. Any decimal, no matter what it is, if it has a decimal point, it's a float. All right, true by itself. You can see it even change color, is a Boolean, but true in quotations is a string. Now, what about lowercase true? A common mistake when people start using Boolean values. Run. Ooh, we get an error. So that one is not defined. All right, what about 10 plus 1.0? Ooh, good question. Well, I know 10 plus 1 is 11. 10 plus 1.0, is that 11 or is that 11.0? And it tells us it's a float, so that must mean it be 11.0 as a decimal. And then we got type hello plus world. Both of those are strings. Put them together, we still have a string. So you can submit the quiz, see how well we did. 2 out of 2. All right, we will move on to the next part here, and we're just really working on our data types. So let's take this quiz, see how well we do. Now, the reason why this is split up too is just because I wanted to keep things organized in case people have separate problems. I could have put this all together in one, but it might have seemed really long and lengthy, so we just kind of kept it simple. So if we ever working on the terminal, we can make new py files, but we will use Ripple here. So I might actually edit out this question. So you guys, I just don't want to get rid of, in case the school actually will pay for Amazon, but I really doubt it. Okay, guess which each data type is. Double check your answers, and we can use this up here. So if I say print type 1, if you really are lazy, you could just copy this in here, paste it up here, click run, and yada yada. It says class string. All right, so once again, we're just checking out what this would be. The print command will just display the data type that we see. Type -10, that is the integer. Type false, Boolean. Type false is a string. Type 3.14, that would be a float. So once again, these are like the same quizzes. Hopefully you guys aren't doing too bad and not freaking out that we have multiple quizzes. So there we go, we got that right. And we'll move on to the next one. So third problem here, converting data types. So this is a good thing to learn how to do to make sure if we're ever giving something, we can convert it to the answer or format that we want to use. So let's take this quiz, this last one that we're going to cover today, and go through this. So let's mess around with something here. If I test it out down here and I just do 10 point, this is the interpreter down here, 0.1. Oh, okay, it will tell me that's 10.7. Is that what we want to do? Okay, so we can always mess around with this bottom thing just to type things out to test it. So if I do, you know, like what's 5 divided by 4, it's 1.25, and what's 10 divided by 2, that's 5.0. So we can see here in the interpreter that it shows us if we divide like integers by anything, it's going to be a float as our answer. So we can mess around with these things. So answer the following question. What value does it return? So when we did 10 plus 0.7, once again, what did it return right here? 10.7. That's it. Is your output an integer or a float data type? That would have been a float, 10.7. All right, now your arguments you've been entering into the type function are sometimes called, wait, no, say this again, I read it ahead. The numbers you've been entering into the type function are sometimes called arguments. Arguments are the values that are provided to a program. The numbers that are returned are called return values. To make sure that you get the return value output you want, you can convert one of the data types to match the other. The for function below convert the data types you identified earlier in Python. These functions change the value inside the parentheses into the data type of the function. So int, if whatever we put inside the parentheses, turns it into an integer. Str turns it into a string. Bool turns it into a Boolean value, and float turns it into a decimal float. So let's match these codes here. If I want to change the floating number to an integer, how would I change 3.14159 into an integer? Well, I would want to, if I want to change it into an integer, I'm going to choose the one of the ints, and I'm going to choose the one that has 3.1415 in it. Next, if I want to change the integer 8675309 to a string, all right, so if we're going to change to a string, we're going to do str, but then 8375609. All right, if I want to change the integer 0 to a Boolean, so I'm going to pick bool, and which one am I going to put inside of it? I'm going to put a 0 inside of it. If I want to change 1 to a Boolean, I'm going to do bool 1. I want to make sure the answer returned from 10 plus 0.7 is a floating number. I'm going to float it. So I'm going to look for the answer that has float, 10 plus 0.7. And to make sure we get an integer, I would do the same thing, but I would have integer there. So we can review this concept by going open up Ripple and messing around with some things, but just make sure we know that any type we have, we can convert those using those strings. So what would be displayed here? We'll kind of predict it and we'll check. If I have the 7.89 and working inside integer type print. So print type integer or 7. So what would be displayed? Well, 7.89 is the inside. We would turn that into an integer. So we turn that into 7. Once it's 7, we're going to figure out the type of it. The integer of 7, well, it's an integer, so the class would be integer, and we would print. So it should say class integer. Let's double check that by copying this and going back up. And we can actually type it in here too in the interpreter if we want. And press enter, and there we go, class int. All right, same thing here, print integer of negative 3.14. Ooh, okay, so if we want to take a guess, we can do that. Integer version of negative 3.14, I would assume would be negative 3 with no decimals because integers do not have decimals. So let's type it into the interpreter up here. We get negative 3. I got none because I actually clicked enter again. All right. What about this one? Print integer 3.14 pi. Okay, well, let's see here. We'll copy that. Pi is a number, but it's not written like there. 3.14 would be a number, but we didn't have it. It's written as a string, so I'm not feeling too confident about this, but let's run it, and yes, we get an error here. So just going back and forth, check nothing, it will give us an error. How about print float 3.14? Well, 3.14 is a decimal. We'll turn it into a decimal with the float command, which it already is a decimal, and we'll print that off. So it should stay exactly the same. Let's double check that answer here before we submit. I mean, we can retake assignments. I'm just going to put it up here and run it. We get 3.14. It's always good to double check. We'll submit this quiz, fingers crossed. I got my answer key set up right. 3 out of 3. All right, guys, we'll end this video here. Hope you guys have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Go Gales.